British first said that the Igbos don't have any history, first of all, they removed the name Biafra, which was exactly the name they used to go into treaties with us. They use, you see there clearly written, the chiefs of Ishekiri and Biafra. They then quietly took that away to now only take a component of that, one clan alone, which is Igbo. Because in Biafra you have the Idoma, you have the Igbo, you have the Bibio, you have the Efik, you have the Izon people, which they call Ijo, you have the Shekiri, you have the Robo, and some parts of Igala.
Wow.
These are the 7 people that make up, these are the 7 tribes that make up Biafra land. The British came then, isolated all the rest, those of our cousins around us, and focused their attention on us. But there's one good thing about it, is that in their amalgamation document that they produced in 1904 or thereabout, which I still have, they made reference, the very first time a European is referring to an African race as great. Yes, the man said the great Igbo race across the Niger. And that speaks volumes. At no time did we give the British the consent to form a country called Nigeria. At no time in our history. I have all the paperwork. We gave them our land to trade.
Right.
That's all. But they went ahead and gradually decided to form a country. They despised us so much that they handed us over to Hausa Fulani Islamic Caliphate. And now they're killing us and nobody's coming to our rescue, which I think is very sad.
Right.
And if you want to stop the menace of Boko Haram, they should support the creation of Biafra.
Absolutely.
That's all they need to do. We don't want them to do anything. Just come at the UN or make a press statement in the White House by saying that the people of Biafra, their suffering is intolerable. We may have to revisit the issue of them still belonging to one Nigeria. That's what they need to say. That's all.
And it would change.
It's done.
Yeah.
It's a game changer. It's finished.
Hello everyone, good day to you and welcome back again to this channel. Today we are going to be talking about something that is very, very important, and it is about Nnamdi Kanu, the repealed law, and why the silence of the Western world, the familiarity of Nnamdi Kanu's case and that of Nelson Mandela of South Africa, and lastly the need for Nnamdi Kanu to re-strategize for the benefit of Igbo and the cause he is fighting for. Extensively, history has taught Africans a painful lesson. The loudest defenders of human rights are often the most selective in applying them. Today, many celebrate the recent posturing of the United States and Israel over insecurity and the religious violence in Nigeria. But then, listen very carefully, because anyone who has followed global power politics deeply knows this truth. The West rarely acts out of compassion, they act out of interest. If the Western world genuinely cared about human rights, rule of law, and freedom of conscience, then the case of Nnamdi Kanu would not be ignored, diluted, or diplomatically buried today the way it is. His ordeal should have been a test case for everything the West claims to stand for: due process, fair trial, respect for international law, and opposition to extraordinary rendition. Instead, silence. This silence is not accidental. It is strategic, and it exposes a deeper reality Biafra represents, which are self-determination, and self-determination is a threat to system built on African subjugation, and that is why they would never canvass for any independence, any absolute independence in Africa. Then part 1, let's talk about the repealed law, as Nnamdi Kanu repeatedly questioned in the court. Nnamdi Kanu has primarily been charged under a treasonable felony provisions of Nigerian Criminal Code, later framed alongside terrorism-related allegations following the proscription of IPOB, which is still pending today in the Supreme Court. Now, here is the core legal issues that many Nigerians do not know about. A man cannot be lawfully tried under a law that is either improperly applied, spent, or overridden by constitutional safeguards. And that is why Kanu's legal team has consistently argued that the offenses relied upon the federal government are colonial era laws designed to suppress dissent, not protect democracy. These laws conflict with the 1999 Constitution, particularly Section 39. You can research about that, which talks about the freedom of expression. Section 40, which talks about the freedom of association, and Section 41, which also talk about the freedom of movement. So, where a statute conflicts with the Constitution prevails. In constitutional law, this is called doctrine of constitutional supremacy. Even where a law has not been formally repealed, it becomes legally ineffective. It violates constitutional rights. Courts have struck down such laws repeatedly in Nigeria's legal history. Then, the Court of Appeal factor. The Court of Appeal is not a political court. It is primarily a court of law and precedents. If the judiciary is fair, the Court of Appeal must confront these realities as regards to Nnamdi Kanu's case. You talk about the extraordinary rendition from Kenya, which violated international law. And of course, the Kenyan courts have also did justice to that very regard. Then you also talk about how Nnamdi Kanu was abducted without extradition proceedings. And lastly, that his trial began on a foundation of illegality. Do not forget, we still have some other nagging questions, some other legal questions of jurisdiction and all sorts. I'm talking about the repealed law. The law is very clear on that. You cannot build a valid prosecution on an illegal arrest. This principle has been affirmed in Nigeria and the international jurisprudence. That is why, if the judiciary is courageous and impartial, Nnamdi Kanu stands a strong chance at the Court of Appeal. Part 2. Let's talk about why the West is suddenly concerned about Nigeria, even though they are not really concerned. Now, let's be honest to ourselves. The United States and Israel are not reacting because Nigerians are suffering. They are not reacting because they care about Nigeria. They are reacting because regional instability affects their strategic and economic interests. Secondly, Nigeria's internal collapse threatens global security calculations. And lastly, Africa is becoming a battleground for multipolar influence. So you see, human rights become relevant only when instability no longer serves their interests. Now, why Nnamdi Kanu was convenient until he wasn't? Consider this irony. Nnamdi Kanu lived in the UK. He exercised free speech under British law. He openly supported Donald Trump at the time. The Igbo share deep historical, cultural, and even philosophical parallels with Israel. Yet today, the UK looks away and the US goes quiet completely. Israel distances itself. Why? Because Biafra is not in any way profitable to the global order. A free, ideological conscious, economically independent African people is dangerous to a system built on dependency. And that is why they do not really care. If the West really care, free and fair elections in Africa would be their #1 project. They have the power to supervise elections, sanction riggers, enforce transparency, block stolen mandates, but they don't. Why? Because a rigged system is predictable, and predictability is profitable to them. A leadership produced by a compromised election is easier to control, easier to pressure, and easier to blackmail. This is why they act only when African leaders refuse to sing their song. They tolerate the oppression when it aligns with their interests. Had Tinubu fully aligned with continued servitude, no one would be loudly questioning the genocide happening today in Nigeria. So, do they really care? Part 4. Let's talk about Biafra, Abraham Traore, and the crime of African self-assertion. The pattern is clear. When Africans begin to speak of sovereignty, reject neo-colonial economics, demand ideological independence, they become problems. That is why Biafra is framed as security threat globally. African emancipation movements are destabilized. Leaders like Abraham Traore of Burkina Faso are relentlessly targeted. It is not about democracy, it is about control. Part 5. Why Nnamdi Kanu was abandoned? Nnamdi Kanu was abandoned because his struggle does not enrich the West. It does not enrich Donald Trump. It does not enrich the UK. It does not enrich the so-called Israel. His cause challenges artificial colonial borders. His message threatens a system built on African fragmentation. To the Western world, Biafra is inconvenient to them. African dignity is optional. Human rights are negotiable. They do not fight injustice, they manage it. Or should I say, they only fight for their own interests and nothing more. Part 6, let's talk about what happens if Nnamdi Kanu comes out. I have a very candid advice for him. If Nnamdi Kanu regains freedom today, the struggle must evolve. He must make some amendments from emotion to institution, build an intellectual frameworks, develop legal, diplomatic, and economic strategies, reduce over-militarized rhetoric. Internalize the cause legally, not emotionally. Use international courts, document human rights abuses, engage global civil society, not government alone. Redefine the narrative from secession alone to self-determination, justice, and restructuring, from anger to legitimacy, from reaction to strategy. Nnamdi Kanu should learn a lesson in perseverance and strategic struggle of Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela's story is instructive because it shows how even the most oppressive regimes cannot extinguish justice or truth. Well, Mandela was arrested and prosecuted under laws designed to silence dissent, laws that were politically motivated, just like what is happening to Nnamdi Kanu today, because the law is not just legal. For decades, the world watched apartheid unfold. Many nations turned a blind eye while human rights abuses escalated because economic and strategic interests mattered more than morality. Mandela endured illegal detentions, show trials, and international neglect. Yet, he remained steadfast. He understood that the long-term strategy for struggle mattered more than immediate outrage. History also shows that global attention is often selective. Mandela's eventual liberation was only accelerated when international pressure became unavoidable, but it was his moral authority and the strategic patience that first changed, not the generosity of those in power. So Nnamdi Kanu also have to integrate this in his struggle, because somehow, looking at Nnamdi Kanu's ordeal, the parallels are striking between Nnamdi Kanu and Nelson Mandela. It is more like the history almost repeating itself, because they have some things in common. You talk about the selective justice and international indifference. Kanu was abducted from Kenya, just as Mandela's earlier activism was met with state suppression. Powerful nations looked away, supporting regimes that served their interests rather than justice. Just like apartheid era in South Africa, Nigerian authorities have used laws as weapons against dissent, targeting Kanu under charges that are legally questionable or outrightly unconstitutional. Mandela's story shows that long-term vision, international advocacy, and principled resistance eventually succeed if the judiciary acts fairly, and if Kanu continues his struggle strategically. The same arc of vindication that lifted Mandela could eventually lift Nnamdi Kanu. The lesson is clear. Power can delay justice, but it cannot destroy it. Kanu's struggle is not just legal, it is symbolic of a people, the Igbo people, demanding dignity and self-determination, echoing Mandela's fight decades ago. So what are we saying? As we close this chapter, one truth becomes unavoidable. Nnamdi Kanu's whatever cases is about the hypocrisy of global powers, the fragility of African sovereignty, the price of demanding dignity in a world built on exploitation alone. History will record this very moment of Nnamdi Kanu, and when it does, it will show that silence of the West was not ignorance, but a choice. If justice still has meaning in Nigeria's judiciary, the Court of Appeal will correct the wrongs of politics with the clarity of the law. So, as we close this very chapter, one truth becomes unavoidable. The story of Nnamdi Kanu is not just a story of one man, it is the mirror reflecting Africa's unhealed wounds. We have seen how laws can be twisted, how global powers can be selective in their morality, and how self-interest often masquerades as justice. Yet, what the world cannot erase is the power of truth, resilience, and vision. Consider this: every act of suppression, every ignored plea, every legal loophole exploited against Nnamdi Kanu has only strengthened the legitimacy of the cause he represents. History favors the patient, the strategic, and the just, not the loudest or the richest. If justice is allowed to breathe in Nigeria, the court will do more than correct procedural errors. They will reassert the supremacy of law over politics and principle over expediency. And when that happens, it will not just be a victory for Kanu. It will be a clarion call for African self-determination, dignity, and sovereignty. But the path forward is not simple. Freedom must be matched with strategy, foresight, and global engagement diplomatically. The struggle is no longer only about survival. It is about building institutions, nurturing ideas, and redefining Africa's place in a world that prefers her weak. Let this serve as a reminder that the fight for justice does not end in a courtroom nor echo of speech. It lives in the hearts and minds of those who refuse to bow to fear, compromise, or bow to pressure, or bow to indifference. When history finally writes these pages, it will remember the courage of those who dared to envision an Africa not as a client but a free and proud people, just like the story of Nelson Mandela the Great. And for those who still doubt, the seeds of truth are stronger than the walls of oppression. They may delay justice, distort facts, or silence voices, but they cannot stop history from vindicating what is right. The story is obviously far from over, and when it continues, it will not whisper. As always, this is Abel Perspectives, your domain for unfiltered news and raw political analysis. If you found this breakdown insightful, don't forget to smash the subscribe button, subscribe to this very channel, turn on the notification so you would always get notified each time a new update is dropped. And please don't forget to leave your comment. What is your opinion about this very analysis? And lastly, like this video, share, and thanks for your time. See you in the next episode.